All right, page 163. Maran was telling us that a person should check their tzitziot to make sure they're not ripped before tefillah. That way you don't make a bracha in vain. And we said that it's not a must, it's not a halakha that you must do it. It's a good piece of advice in order that you will never find yourself in a situation where you made a bracha on something that was not kosher. Now, while I'm on this point, checking tefillin is an important thing, to make sure tefillin are kosher. There was a story once that a man, he bought the most kosher tefillin when he was a young man. He wore them his whole life. He never agreed to wear anybody else's tefillin because his were the most kosher. And once he was in a place that he didn't have access to, he didn't think thought he was going to come home that night, and he didn't come home that night. He had to wear someone else's tefillin the next day. He was so upset about it. And by the time he got home, it was already past sunset, so he wasn't able to put on his own pair of tefillin. And when he passed away after 120 years, the Bedin Shalmala told him that he only fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin once in his life. And that was when he wore the other man's tefillin, because his tefillin were never kosher.
He never checked.
He never checked.
There was a friend of mine in New York 35 years ago was having a lot of problems. I said, you definitely should get your tefillin checked. And it was missing the word echad out of the Shema. After he changed in his mazal.
We had a person now in Israel, they just publicized this year that somebody opened up his tefillin to check. He paid a lot of money for his tefillin. Like a very religious man, a Kollel guy. He went to check his tefillin, they opened it up, and inside of the tefillin was a piece of paper. It said, it says like, hey loser, something like that, to that effect. The whole thing was a joke. It was just they wrapped up scrolls and it went all over social media. You could look it up.
Hey loser,
What it shows you is that wherever you have the potential for the most holiness, you always have the potential for the most low-life scum.
They tried to rip over my tefillin at the border when I came back from Mexico once.
Well, they busted a man a few years back
bringing drugs in
for smuggling diamonds in his tefillin.
Really?
Yeah, so they've been very wary about tefillin since then. This man, this is doing that to tefillin. On top of that, all the Jews in the world have to suffer because of it.
Forever.
Yeah.
When I was leaving Samsung, they were asking what's in there.
And the tefillin.
Because they x-ray everything you take out. They have very high security.
They never invented anything. They shouldn't worry.
Hamachmir al atzmo, he who is strict on himself. Livdok chutei tzitzit, in order to check the strings of the tzitziot. Yesh omrim, some say, the question was, what do you check exactly? What are you checking for? You're checking to see they're not ripped. So which part of the tzitzit do you have to check? So some say, shebodek mimakom hanekev. Some say you check from the hole, shebekanaf talit, which is in the corner of the talit.
Nekef is literally...
Nekev is a hole, like nekavim.
Oh, okay.
You're not sure it's
like an orifice.
Yes, an orifice.
Oh, which letter are we on?
In chavav.
So like a little hole where it's connected, where it's tied around right
Yes.
onto the fabric.
Right in the corner, exactly.
Thank you.
V'adak shira, and until the knot.
That's why you thought not when my tzitzit were disintegrating my old talit so far up, it was still kosher because
Yeah.
the knot was up
Yes.
in the beginning.
Yes.
I was very surprised.
Somebody else would have probably told you mistakenly that it wasn't. V'yesh omrim, and some say, shelo nahagu livdok hachutim, that we don't have a custom to check the strings b'makom shemunachim ala beged, in the place where they're attached to the clothing, meaning to the clothing, the cloth of the tzitzit. Mipnei, because she'en darkam lihikara b'makom hazeh, because it's not generally the place where your tzitzit are going to rip. Most of the time, that's the part of tzitzit. Even if you wear your tzitzit out, that's the part of the tzitzit that's inside of your pants. Or most tzitzit don't rip on the top; they rip on the bottom.
Right.
V'yesh omrim, some say.
Rip in the bottom. How much you lose?
What do you mean?
The strings certain length. If you lose certain length, it is not good.
We're going to see now all the things that we need. You're right. We're going to have to see what makes it tzitzit pasul.
It seems weird you don't have to check up to the knot. I guess is the theory that if it was above the knot, then it would have already come loose and fallen off, and you wouldn't even have
When you
one.
say above, what do you mean?
Well, like there's where the loop is. You know,
So the theory would be that what?
that if it's ripped up there, then it's just going to fall apart and fall off, and then you would have lost your tzitzit. And then
Well, not if you only
wouldn't see it.
lose one string.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of weird that you only check up to the knot. That's,
No, what they mean by you only check from the knot means from the corner until the top knot.
so you're only checking the loop. You're not checking the.
Yeah,
The fringes.
because remember that first knot is the one that needs. That's the only part of the tzitzit that's biblical.
That's biblical.
Now some say the opposite, that you don't check there at all because that's not normally where it ripped. V'yesh omrim, some say shivdok gam b'makom hakichot. You also should check the place where there's actually the winding of the tzitziot, the knots. V'gam et chutei tzitzit lemala achar ha'kshirot, and also the rest of the strings after the knots. V'amachmir b'chozen, one who's strict to check all of his tzitziot, all of them, meaning from top to bottom. Tava alav bracha, he should have an extra blessing dwell on him.
What's the word for the windings?
Krichot. Likroch means to wrap.
Okay.
Which is why, I don't know if you know, but the Hebrew word for sandwich is a karich. Because you used to wrap it up in a lafa.
Yeah.
Soft.
Right. Like korech from the Seder. Literally means to wrap. To wrap up the food inside of a matzah, not to make a sandwich out of it. But if you have matzah like I have matzah, you can't wrap anything inside of it, it'll just snap in two.
Yeah, those are the soft matzahs.
The halakha is that your matzah is allowed to be as thick as your fist.
Whoa. Like a sponge.
Yes, and once it's thicker than your fist, it might still be kosher, but we believe that you can't check it well enough to make such a matzah kosher. So that's the thickest that your matzah can be, is the size of your fist. And the Mishnah says, what happens, the Mishnah is a famous question, what happens if you drop your matzah into a box of challah, and you don't know which one is the matzah, which one is the challah? What do you do? What do you do? Meaning, it's the same question as what if you drop your kosher steak into a tub of not kosher steaks? Are you allowed to eat, are you allowed to say, well, I'll just take one and I hope that's the kosher one? Do you count the majority? Meaning, is it 60 and 40? What are you counting here? Well, it's not a matter of batel as much as it's a matter of, imagine that the tub had 60 kosher steaks and someone dropped in one not kosher steak. Would the halakha be that you can eat 60 of the steak? It's not batel because they're not mixed in together to the point where you couldn't tell them apart. Could you eat 60 steaks and then just not have one of them? Meaning, would the rule of majority apply that they're mostly kosher? We just know that one of them is not kosher, so we won't eat one of them.
You better hope you don't make a mistake.
It's kind of like a Jewish relay. Like it's our own version of the game. The same thing with matzah and challah. But if you look at your matzah today, who can drop your matzah into a box of challah and you wouldn't know which one's the matzah?
You don't even own it when it's during the challah.
Well, that's right. That's besides the point. The question is, what do you see from this Mishnah? You see from the Mishnah that the matzot that they used looked like bread. And I saw an advertisement last year that made me very upset. Someone said, use shmura matzah, not machine matzah, because that's the way that we did it 2,000 years ago. And I thought about it, and they had a picture of this flat shmura matzah, and I said, listen, I'm not against shmura matzah, it's not my war. But how can you tell people that 2,000 years ago we used a flat cracker for matzah? When very clearly in Shulchan Aruch Maran writes that flat crackers are mizonot. That's why you make a mizonot on a cracker. What's the difference between a cracker and your matzah? Why is one a hamotzi? Questions that come up. These are questions that nobody would like me to ask because the answers to them would have to go something along the lines of, well, we don't do what we used to do. Doesn't orthodoxy mean that you always do what they used to do? Well, then we get ourselves in trouble here. And so it's better sometimes not to ask these questions.
If you're making a motzi and something, it shouldn't be a cracker.
Sure, yeah, you're right.
I mean, you could say achilat matzah, I guess, because it fulfills the laws of matzah, but does it fulfill the law of
being lechem, of being bread? Maran calls this rikin dakin, flat crackers, like flat bread. Not bread, like cracker, crispy, you break them. This is the reason why Sfaradim the rest of the year, not myself, but the rest of the Sfaradim, make a mizonot on matzah. Because it's not really bread. Well, if it's not really bread, then why in Pesach are using it for matzah? These are questions that people would rather avoid them. They would rather avoid them. Because it makes us look bad. I mean, instead of talking about rice for Pesach next year, maybe I should talk about fist-sized matzahs. We'll put out kosher for Pesach rolls.
Make some. My mom used to make these Passover rolls that were so tasty, like super good.
But they must have been made in a matzah meal, right?
Yeah, it was a Manischewitz recipe.
Right. No,
I
so
like them, yeah.
that's a kosher according to everybody aside from Hasidim who don't eat gebrachs.
Yeah.
What if you made rolls out of flour and water?
Real flour, real water. You know.
How long is a matzah allowed to be out before you bake it?
18 minutes.
Let me ask you this question. Says the Mishnah. What if the woman comes to the communal oven? Because no one had ovens in their home. You come to the communal matzah oven, and there's a line. Do you have to throw away all your dough? Because 18 minutes is up.
Wow.
What do? Says the Mishnah, you just keep kneading the dough. And so long as the dough is being used, meaning it's being kneaded, the 18 minutes don't start yet. So technically, I can have my dough being kneaded for 2 hours while it's waiting for the oven, and it's okay. The opposite is true. The Gemara mentions, what if you're baking in the sun and you're out there in the sun and you leave it alone? Well, 18 minutes would go much faster if you're out there in the sun than if you would be in the shade. These are halachot. When I went to be a mashgiach at a matzah factory, at the 10-minute mark, they throw out the matzah. Because they're so strict about this 18 minutes. The 10-minute mark, they take whatever's left and throw it away. And that's why the cost of shmura matzah is up in the roof. What if you took all those 12-minute matzahs, Hashem Yishmor, the 12-minute matzahs, and you gave them to people who couldn't afford the boxes of $23 shmura matzahs? Maybe? That would be too intelligent of a thing to do. Harav Peretz, I won't lie to you, Harav Peretz goes to the matzah factory every year, and he takes whatever matzahs they throw away. He says, because what for them is not kosher, for me is great for Pesach.
Wow.
The person has to know. You have to know halachot. When people don't know halachot, he doesn't tell anybody.
I've seen matzah being made in a small Yemenite village of Israel. And just private people making their own matzah. No one's got a stopwatch.
Right. Well, but maybe you're eating chametz, Barry. When I asked the rabbi, a big posek whose name you've heard of, and I asked him if I was allowed to eat Yemenite matzah, why did I ask him? Not for myself. My roommate told me it wasn't kosher. So I asked, and he told me, we can't eat it, it's chametz. Are you out of your mind? Chametz, you think we're eating chametz? 2,000 years we've been doing this, we're eating chametz now. But certain people, they just lack the sophistication that halakha would require inside of them. You have to answer questions. Why is your matzah thinner than a fist? What would you do with the Mishnah about the matzot mixed in with the challah? What about the Mishnah that says you can knead your dough for as long as you want it? What about people have to...
If it is that thick, it takes more than 18 minutes
to bake.
Cook.
I'll tell you the truth. The truth is our parents does not let us, me personally, our students, he doesn't let us eat the thicker matzot, what you call the soft matzot. The reason being, he's been to too many matzah factories where he slices open the thin matzah and he finds a doughy piece inside. And he says that the problem is that with matzot, you're not supposed to hire your Arabs from the street to be baking your matzot. Or you should hire people who are Torah scholars. They know what they're doing. So what happens is you hire people to do this process that you laid out for them, but they're not experts. Yeah, of course, they're not experts in baking matzah.
Joe Schmo.
With the right temperature, shouldn't that get the entire mess?
It should.
I mean,
If you trust the people baking the matzahs that they should be baking it for enough time, not that they want to make more matzahs come out of the
Is there a
oven.
required temperature for that?
Not a required temperature. Common sense that would require it to be. What happens a lot of times, people like that look of the burnt matzah, like the black on the outside. Very often, if you know about burnt food, like you have a burnt chicken that is raw on the inside, it's a normal thing that happens in the world. Look, Thanksgiving is around the corner, and look how many housewives are going to make that mistake. This is a normal thing that people, it looks baked, what do I know? He's not an expert in the laws of chametz and which consistency of dough is still considered.
You're right. If you pick something, you left it in the middle.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's the same reason why I can't speak for anybody else, why I don't heat up bread on Shabbat. Not because it's not allowed to heat up bread. I believe that
Heat up bread.
a lot of the bread...
Say that again, why you don't want.
No ranch.
Oh,
A lot of the bread...
Should be more get back to the topic.
A lot... It'll have relevance to tzitzit berry. Just 1 second.
Oh, okay.
The bread inside, a lot of times you find doughy pieces of bread, or it's not fully baked on the inside. Why do I want to stick my head here in a biblical prohibition of cooking on Shabbat? I don't, so I stay away from it.
I don't understand. You mean like putting a bread on a blech you want to?
Yeah, I want to.
Because it'll complete cooking it.
Yeah. A lot of bread that you buy is actually pretty raw when they sell it. And maybe not bread that you buy, I don't know, but my bread that I'm buying in the
Make it
store,
all at home.
it's pretty doughy. People like that
Where
feeling.
buy it from Ralph?
When I buy pita from Arabs when I lived in Jerusalem. Great pita, delicious. But the inside, you can make a new challah dough out of it.
Yeah, Ralph bread is okay.
I'm not saying yes, no. I'm saying if you want to heat up your bread, do it in the sun or on top of a water heater. Not on a platter. Platter's a cooking device.
Oh, during Shabbat.
Yeah. During the week, you could do whatever you like. You can make your own challah. But how does it have to do with tzitzit? You have to be an expert in halakha to know these things. Like we mentioned about zev tzitzit. You can't, people see things, that can't be kosher. Man, you don't know halachot well enough to say something's not kosher. So it's better for you to just and keep moving. These halachot here, of checking your tzitziot, are all in the category of you should do it. And so these things, you could do this once a month, or once every week, or whatever is good for you. It doesn't have to be every single morning to do all these things, but make sure that your tzitziot are kosher. People don't realize sometimes your tzitziot are fraying, especially the ones on the back, that you don't always see them. And they drag on the ground, they got caught in a chair, all kinds of things could happen. It could happen that in the zipper of the talit bag, you don't know what could happen. It's a good idea to check. Our rabbis were not silly. They knew what they were saying. It just doesn't have to be an obsession of yours. Hamachmir al atzmo, somebody who's strict on himself, livdok chutei tzitzit, who's strict to check the strings of his tzitzit. Yesh omrim, some say shetzarich livdok, that he must check af hatalit katan, even his tzitzit, his small tzitzit, shelovsho tachat habegadim, which he wears underneath his clothing.
It's only some say.
Yes, because remember above we said that some say the only thing you have to check are biblically required tzitziot, meaning a talit made out of wool. But a talit made out of cotton or your tzitzit that are small, that's not biblical, it's just rabbinic, and for a rabbinic mitzvah you don't go out of your way that much to check. ואף על פי שאפילו אם נפסלו הציציות אין לחוש לאיסור בחל ותלה, the reason here is because your tzitzit, you don't really make a blessing on your small tzitzit, especially if you wear a talit. And therefore, you don't have to worry about maybe your tzitzit become not kosher, and then you're going to make a bracha levatala. You don't have to check for that. Shaar eino mevarech alav, because you don't make a blessing, like we explained in Halacha 16. Aval makom yesh lachosh im nifseku chutei tzitzit. So what are you concerned about? You're not concerned that maybe my tzitzit, my small tzitzit, will become not kosher, and then I'll be making a bracha in vain, because you don't make a bracha. So what are you concerned about? Maybe your tzitzit became unkosher, and now you are...
Now you're not making fulfilling mitzvah.
Say better than, now you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, say better than that.
You're demonstrating?
Say blessing for nothing.
You're transgressing prohibition.
What are you transgressing?
Wearing a four-corner garment.
Oh, very good. So you don't have to wear tzitzit, but you're not allowed to wear a four-corner garment that doesn't have tzitzit. So the reason you're checking your tzitzit is not because maybe you'll make a blessing, because you don't make a blessing. And it's not necessarily because you're afraid you won't get the mitzvah of tzitzit. You're afraid that you'll end up wearing a four-cornered garment that needs tzitzit, but now doesn't have any. See, we're so used to looking at the mitzvah of tzitzit as a mitzvah, like, you should wear tzitzit. We very rarely understand the mitzvah of tzitzit as I'm not allowed to wear a four-cornered garment that doesn't have tzitzit. V'yesh omrim, and some say, she'en tzarich livdok, you don't have to check, elat chutei tzitzit shebatalit shemevarech alei. You only have to check the strings of the tzitzit which you are now wearing. It seems to be that halakha is trying to say that you don't check the tzitziot that you're not wearing. Like, don't go through your drawers, start checking tzitziot. You're checking the one that you're wearing. The only reason they told you to check your tzitziot is because of the gravity of the avera of making a bracha in vain. And anything which you don't make a blessing on, you wouldn't have to check its tzitziot. And someone who's strict to wear tzitzit strings, even with on his small tzitzit, he should receive an extra blessing. Alright? So all of you, check. You'll get an extra blessing. B'ezrat Hashem. See you tomorrow night. God willing.